Hello everyone, my name is Eshell, also known as Prot. In this video I want to offer you a demo of Eshell, the Emacs shell. I want to show you some of the extensions that I have written for it, which I believe will showcase in concrete terms the core value of this tool, which is twofold. One, it can interpret Emacs Lisp, and two, it is deeply integrated into the rest of the Emacs milieu. And this means that you can treat it as a seamless bridge between the various kinds of buffers that you are visiting in Emacs. I don't want to focus too much on the kind of information you will find in the manual. I think the manual is short, it is informative, and it is all you need to get started in case you want to try Eshell. I want to focus on my extensions for it, which are the part of Eshell being capable of interpreting Elisp, and by extension Eshell being as programmable as the rest of Emacs. Just to say before I start with my demo, just to highlight the main difference between Eshell on the one hand and the standard Unix shells on the other, such as bash. Eshell is a command shell in the strict sense of the term, in the sense that it is strictly line oriented. You will type some input, it will produce output, you can operate on that text, and then you can go back to the prompt and produce another command or whatever. So it is strictly limited to that interaction model. Whereas the likes of bash or Z shell or whatever, which are typically run inside of a terminal emulator, can also leverage the terminal capabilities, the terminal's capabilities. So for example, if you are running xterm with bash, you can type in commands such as tmax, vim, htop, and these commands will take over the terminal emulator in order to display their quasi-graphical interface. Whereas in Eshell, there is none of that. This is strictly limited to the interaction model of input, output, repeat, and loop, as they say, the REPL, the standard REPL. So with this in mind, I want to show you what Eshell can do, what you can actually teach it to do, and then you will have to assess on your own whether this is something that you could incorporate in your day-to-day work, or maybe you cannot because of some command that needs to leverage terminal capabilities. Just to add that if you really want to have a terminal emulator-like experience inside of Emacs, you can use vterm. I also have configs for vterm, but I have never really needed it. I am using Eshell this whole time, and I have never had any need for vterm, but it is there in case I ever need to run some other program. Anyhow, let's start with our demo over here. Eshell is, of course, implemented as a standard, not standard, but as an Emacs buffer with some special features to it. So this means that you can move around the way you would in any other buffer. Now, the core value is, of course, the fact that you can interpret Elisp. You can see here in the first prompt the standard kind of command that you will run in bash, for example, and you can see the output right below, whereas here you can see the same idea, but through an Elisp command. We can see over here the help for properties. It doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that it interprets Elisp, and we can see in action that it has added some color to it as per my instructions. So let's see what kind of extensions we can program for Eshell to make our life easier. I want to browse my input history using my completion framework. By default, if you type meta and R in Eshell, it will just ask you for a regular expression with no visual feedback whatsoever, with no element of interactivity to it. Whereas here I can, for example, highlight and I can see, for example, another command that I had, and I can very quickly find whatever item from my history this way. Let's find, for example, FD. Okay, so this is very nice. Let's produce some output over here. FD, in case you don't know, it is an alternative to GNU find. So you may want to check that out in case you are not aware of it. Now let's see some other things we can do with Eshell. Let's say that I am over this file, and this is of course an extension of my present working directory. So the full path is the present working directory, and then this thing in bold, and then of course the file. So I am over a file, the point is over a file. I want to visit this file directly. Of course, you know in Emacs, when you do, for example, Control-X, Control-F, and then press Meta and N, you will always get the file at point or whatever piece of contextual information you have at point. This leverages a feature of Emacs known as future history. You can look that up. It is very intriguing indeed. But I don't want to type Control-X, Control-F, then Meta-N. This is too demanding. I want to just visit the file at point directly. So I have a command specifically for that. You can see I have visited the file right away, and I can edit this file the standard way you would edit any other file. Let's come back to the shell. Now I want, instead of visiting the file, I want to visit the directory that contains the file. So, of course, as you can imagine, I have a command for that, and I am, of course, in dired, and I can use the full power of dired now to perform any file system operations that I want. I have showcased dired in several videos of mine. It is simply superb. So we can see already that I have two little pieces of Elisp that help me make my life easier. Let's say that I want, for whatever reason, I want to print this file. I want to print it in the output of Eshell. I want to insert it in the output over here. So I can do just that with another little snippet of Elisp that I have. By the way, I will provide a link to my .emacs in case you want to copy the code. I'm not sure if the code is necessarily the best in terms of quality, but it is good for our purposes right now to show the possibilities of Eshell. So now that you have some output, this is standard in Eshell. If you do Control-C, Control-R, let's try this again. I am a bit clumsy sometimes. Control-C, Control-R, it will take you, you can see where I am, it will take you to the first line of the output. If you do Control-U and then Control-C, Control-R, it will take you to the first line, but also narrow the buffer to just the output. So this is very nice indeed, in case you want to check something in the last command that you run. And then, of course, Control-X, N, and W to widen to get out of the narrowing effect. I like this idea, but I think we can go a step further. So I have my own little commands for this. Let's say that when I have the output, I want to narrow to the output, but I also want to highlight some piece of text. So for example, let's do this right away. It is asking me for a regular expression to highlight. Of course, I can just type a string. Let's see something that would have a few matches. Let's have match. So you can see it is narrowing the buffer to the output of the last command, and it is highlighting the terms that I am interested in. And this is, of course, very helpful when you have the output of a command that you need to inspect and you are searching for something very specific. You don't want to miss anything. So, of course, this is the way to do. And because this is a standard buffer, right? You can, for example, search. So, for example, you can find whatever it is that you want. No problem there. So let's exit this. Other things that you can do, just to say, let me add to this a bit. Just to say that, of course, in Emacs, you can always highlight a string by using the command Emacs highlight regex, or the key binding for it, which is meta S, H, and R, and again you are asked for the regular expression. So you could, for example, highlight multiple terms, not just one, but I am limiting it to one because I think this is what you would need by default, and then of course you can extend this idea. Let's see again what we have over here. Let's now switch to another directory, and we will get back to this idea with the output in a bit. Of course, you can do cd and then whatever to go to the directory that you want. In the manual, you will find that you can do cd and the equals sign to produce a list with the recent directories that you switched to, that you cd'd into. This is a good idea because then you can do cd hyphen and the number to go to that directory. But what I find more useful is to, rather than do this thing, leverage my completion framework. So I want to do, for example, Control-C-D, which is a command, Control-C and the equals sign, which is the same principle, but with completion. So I want, for example, the first match over here, or I could go to, for example, bin, whatever I want. Let's go to this one. You can see that I switched to a recent directory with a completion. Let's do this again. Let's go to, I saw Pacman somewhere. Okay, dot files. Okay, so this is very nice. You can see how easy it is to switch directories. No more cd and then tab, tab, tab until you find what you are looking for. This is much more convenient. In the same vein, I like the idea of recursively searching for a subdirectory from the present working directory. I have this generally in Emacs when I want to search for things, but I have implemented it also inside of Eshell. So this command over here allows me to visit a subdirectory inside of the present working directory. So let's say that I want to go to something that ends in D, so I have those two. Let's go to this one, and of course you can see that I switched again to this directory. Very nice indeed. Of course, you know from your standard shell that if you do, for example, cd and hyphen, you go to the previous directory. If you do cd on its own, you will go to the home directory. These are standard things. Cd and the two dots will take you up a directory, and so on, so forth. No need to bother you with this. What happens if we do cd and let's say Emacs and then dired? No, it won't work. Oh yeah, of course you have to do cd. Okay, you have to do cd and then dired. Yeah, sorry about that. You have to do cd dired and then the dot. Of course, you have to specify a directory. So I was wondering what happened. Why didn't it work? You have to specify the directory that dired should switch to. So the idea is that you can, of course, switch to a directory and from there go to the dired buffer and work from there, which is very nice indeed. Other things that we could do, let me think about this a bit. Of course, you have the standard Control-X, Control-J. sorry, Control X, Control, again I am clumsy, Control X, Control J, sorry about that, to jump to the directory for the file you are in. This uses dired jump. This is one of the best commands in Emacs. I use this daily. You can do it for any directory and it will go. So for example, I am in the dot files, Control X, Control J, you see I am going to the dired buffer of the dot files. And of course I have bound this to super and J, which is more convenient. So this is very nice indeed. What else can we do with this? Let's come back, let's go to the directory where I am here, and let's do ls. And I have this nice copy pasta. Let's insert it in here. And of course you see how I was able to insert the contents of the file at point in the output of Eshell. Let's say now that I want to capture this output and put it in a buffer of its own. Control C and O is the key binding I have for this specific command. You can see this is Eshell, and you can see that this is a bespoke buffer that I have for this kind of interaction. I have it in its own buffer, and this means now that I can write this buffer to a file, for example, Control X, Control W, and then save this file somewhere, and I am good to go. I have stored some valuable piece of information that I want to check at a later point. So this is very nice indeed. Let's come back over here and let's see what else we can do. We can, of course, output, you can read the manual, you can send the output of a command to another device, another file, or even to an Emacs buffer. So I want to show you just with the buffer. Let's switch to the Scratch buffer. You can see this is the Scratch buffer. Let's clean it up a bit. So I have just a small script over here which allows me to select, sorry, let's do this again because let's close the Scratch buffer. You saw that it has nothing. So cut copy pasta and then select the buffer with completion, of course. So I am selecting the buffer and I have configured it just to add those little extras that you need, this markup that you need in order for the command to be valid. So I want to cut and send this directly to the Scratch buffer. I hit the return key and now let's switch to the Scratch buffer, and of course you can see I have sent the command over there. So this is very nice indeed. So let's close the Scratch. You can of course read the manual and it has other ways of using this. The manual will also show you how to run loops, for example, for I in 1, 2, 3, and then you could do echo hello I. So it is a bit different from what you would do in Bash, for example, but you can find this information in the manual. The manual also includes information on the equivalent of Bash parameter expansion, so the fact that you can, for example, upcase these variables and other things. But this kind of information is better if you see it in the official manual rather than me showing you the obvious thing of just upcasing some string. So this is the core idea, folks. Let me switch to my Emacs window over here, to my .emacs, because I just want to check. I hope I didn't miss anything important. Sorry, I made some changes to the keyboard and I keep pressing caps lock. I need to configure it. I want to have the control key map to caps lock, and it is not working right now, but sorry about that. Let me just quickly check in case I missed something critical. Of course, the same principle to save the absolute file system path of the file at point. You get the idea how that would work. No need to bother you with the minutia. What else do we have? Of course, recent directories, recent history. I have showcased everything you need to see. I think this is enough to get an idea. And of course, look at this. These are very small functions, very little things. You can switch. Let's see. You can use it to go to a directory. So let's go back to Eshell just to show this last thing. So of course, this one will go to a recent directory. So it CDs into a recent directory. But if you do with a universal prefix and do this, it will go to dired instead of staying inside of Eshell. Of course, it also switched in Eshell. So these are just the little kind of things that you can add to Eshell to really make it your own, to really make it do things that are not available by default, but which are easy given the fact that this is basically a REPL for Eshell. So these are all I had to show in this demo. In conclusion, I want to say that Eshell is a line-oriented shell. It comes with advantages and disadvantages. You will have to test this in your own specific workflow to see whether it could act as a bridge between the various Emacs interfaces that you are using, or maybe it would not be sufficient because you have some specific command that you run in a terminal emulator and you need to keep using that environment. So that's all from my side. I will link to my .emacs in case you want to copy anything. Of course, if you have suggestions on how to improve the code, please let me know. I am always learning. I don't know much about Elisp anyway. And I will also provide information on some other very useful resources for Eshell. There is a recent video from Mike Zamansky that shows you some things about Eshell. Mike also configures in action an Eshell switcher, so that is a very insightful video. There is another video from Howard Abrahams, which offers you a comprehensive tour of the features of Eshell, and Howard focuses more on the REPL aspects of Eshell. And lastly, there is a blog post from Pierre Neidhart, also known as Ambrevar. I will link to that blog post as well, where Pierre elaborates on the pros and cons of Eshell and why you would benefit from switching to it for your day-to-day command shell tasks. That's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.